Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 4.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 43 of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. I want to acknowledge the fact that we are gathered on the ancestral territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
Of Atlantic salmon populations. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. And pursuant to our routine motions, I want to advise committee members that all witnesses appearing virtually today have successfully conducted their required testing. I want to remind participants of the following housekeeping points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those in video conference, click on the little microphone at the bottom of your screen, and you will be able to go listen in what language you choose. I would like to remind witnesses that committee members may ask questions to you in either English or French, so please put on your earpieces now so that you can be ready for any of that. Now, a reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. And for members in the room, obviously, if you want to speak, put your hands up and we will recognize you. I want to welcome our witnesses from the Kings Clear First Nation. We have Chief Justice Grubin, Councillor Patrick Polchis, and Chad Solomon. From the Fédération Québécoise pour le Salmon Atlantique, we have Norman Fisset, President, and Mariam Bergeron, Executive Director. So we also have Paul White, an angler by video conference. So I just want to let the witnesses know you have 5 minutes for your group. You don't get 5 minutes each. So whichever is the spokesperson for your group can start. I will give you, we're clocking you, and I will literally give you a shout out when you have 1 minute left. So you can see to wrap up. If you don't get to finish your full presentation, you have to wrap up, and then you can get to expand on it during the question and answer period, because there will be a question and answer period. So we will start with the witness's opening statement for 5 minutes, starting with Chief Grubin. Chief Grubin, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable Chair, committee members, and fellow witnesses, hello everyone. My name is Chief Justice Grubin, and I'm newly elected Chief of Village. Today I want to talk to you about salmon in the Wolastoq, known as the St. John River, the homeland and waters of my people, the Wolastoq Aleut. This river is the longest river and largest watershed in eastern Canada. The 6 communities of the Wolastoq Way Nation are situated along the banks of the Wolastoq, and our language translates to the beautiful and bountiful river. The Wolastoq runs past my home and has fed my family, guided my ancestors, and shaped every value I carry as a leader. My community of village lives in the shadow of the Mactaquac Dam, an enormous structure built in the late 60s that has drastically changed the Wolastoq. When the dam was constructed, DFO and NB Power agreed to mitigate its impacts by establishing the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility. For most of the past century, this building has helped protect the genetic diversity of the Wolastoq, including the unique species of wild Atlantic salmon in our river. In February 2026, DFO abruptly announced that this facility would close due to budget cuts. I want to be extremely clear that the closure of this facility represents the extinction of salmon in the Wolastoq watershed. For approximately $150K in annual operating costs, DFO is risking the full extinction of a genetically unique species of wild Atlantic salmon on the Wolastoq. This is urgent, and the full closure is planned for October of 2026. Programs, people, and the salmon have already been impacted. The salmon above the Mactaquac Dam are functionally isolated. Before industrialization, more than hundreds of thousands of Atlantic salmon returned home every year. Today, only a few hundred make it back. The Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility is not a luxury, it is a lifeline, and it raises Tobic River salmon. And it has been the bridge between extinction and survival for decades. This year, thousands of young salmon are expected to be released into the Wolastoq from this facility to help restore the population above and below the dam. If this facility closes before alternative measures are in place, they will likely die. The end of a critical species in the Willistic will have ripple effects across the region. And what is happening here is not only a conservation failure, it is a legal one. Under Section 35(1) of the Constitution Act of 1982, it recognizes and affirms Aboriginal and treaty rights of Indigenous peoples in Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada in Haida Nation versus BC in 2004 established clearly that the Crown has a duty to consult Indigenous people when it contemplates actions that may adversely impact our rights, not after the fact, not as courtesy, but as a constitutional obligation. And the decision to shut down the last facility standing between the Willistic salmon and extinction is exactly the kind of decision that demands that consultation. The Willistic Aleut have held treaty rights to fish the Willistic since the peace and friendship treaties of the 18th century. We also hold inherent Aboriginal rights to harvest and manage salmon, which are rights we have held since time immemorial. These rights are supposed to be protected by Canada's Constitution, but we have not had access to salmon fishing for decades, and our ancestors and elders stopped fishing as a gesture to help restore the species. This is a future generation-oriented sacrifice because salmon, Balamawag, is not just a food source for us. It's a cultural keystone featured in our creation stories, our ceremonies, and it is a relationship to our homelands. They sacrificed to preserve Balamawag for the future. And we and Willistic community members all along the Willistic have done our part to keep the salmon alive. And DFO's decision undercuts all of those efforts. To threaten Balamawag is to threaten our culture and our legacy. And this decision for closure of the Biodiversity Center was made out of the reductionist position from the government. However, Western economics does not consider the distinct relationships Indigenous people have with our First Mother, our homelands, and her children. In the same breath, the federal government proposes this cut that removes the most important mitigation efforts surrounding Mactaquac Dam. There is a $10 billion refurbishment. This extends the life of the project for 50 years. How can DFO justify these critical mitigation efforts while the dam's impact will be extended? We are asking DFO to reaffirm Canada's commitment to Willistic salmon, to Balamawag, and if DFO can make this decision to cut this program on the Willistic when times get tough, they can do it anywhere, excluding the Restigouche, the Fraser, the Marjorie, and the Miramichi. The health of the Willistic is not just an Indigenous issue, it is a test to the country's environmental and reconciliation commitments and to see if it means anything at all. Leewin, we cannot let this species go extinct. All my relations.
Thank you, Justice Grubin. I'm now going to go to the next speaker, who is Norman Fissette. And is Norman speaking on behalf of the group? Oh, you are speaking. Sorry. Miriam Bergeron, Executive Director.
Oui.
5 minutes, please.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, on behalf of the Quebec Federation,
speak on that in a second?
Testing, testing. Can you hear the interpreter? Testing, testing. Can you hear me now? Can you hear the interpreter? Okay, it seems to be working now. Okay.
Ms. Bergeron, begin or continue?
Merci.
I think you've used up 9 minutes so far. No, 9 seconds so far, so it's okay.
Parfait.
Go ahead.
Merci.
Thank you. Madam Chair, on behalf of the Quebec Federation for Atlantic Salmon, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion on the decline of wild Atlantic salmon in Canada. The Federation brings together the key stakeholders committed to the conservation and management of Atlantic salmon in Quebec, salmon river management organizations, outfitters, fishermen, researchers, environmental organizations, municipalities, First Nation partners, and citizens. Our mission is to ensure the sustainability of Atlantic salmon and the ecosystems on which it depends. The low runs observed since 2023 is a major warning sign. In 2024, Quebec experienced its worst salmon return since modern records began, although some improvements were observed in 2025, and the outlook for 2026 is more encouraging. The situation remains concerning and requires increased mobilization from all partners. Available scientific data show that the main losses now occur in the marine environment, and there are many theories, yet the majority of investments made over the past decades have been dedicated to freshwater habitats. These efforts have been critical and must continue, but they must now be complemented by an ambitious strategy for research and intervention in the marine environment. In this regard, the Strait of Belle-Île is a strategic area. The majority of Quebec's juvenile salmon use this corridor during their migration to the North Atlantic, but knowledge about the mortalities occurred during this stage remains limited. The Federation is currently working with various partners to collect and analyze juvenile salmon, particularly those from bycatch, which are likely not the cause of the current decline. This work aims to better understand their overall health status and the causes of mortality affecting their survival. There's already a collaborative work plan amongst various stakeholders stemming from a working group coordinated by the Government of Quebec, in which DFO participates. It is essential that these initiatives be supported over the long term to prevent our rivers from being in excellent health while lacking salmon to return and spawn there. At the same time, conservation efforts in freshwater habitats in Quebec have helped maintain the quality of many rivers. Downstream migration data show that smolt production remains relatively high in several watersheds, reflecting the remarkable work carried out in Quebec over the past decades. We are currently working to update the provincial Atlantic salmon management plan. Several associated conservation measures, scientific monitoring programs, and restoration projects could benefit from specific financial support from the federal government. Better coordination of efforts will help maximize the impact of investments made on the ground. Climate change also poses a major challenge in freshwater ecosystems. The importance of thermal refuges, areas of cooler water that allow salmon to survive, periods of heat is growing. Although several adaptation measures have already been implemented, particularly in the management of recreational fishing, there remains a need to speed up the acquisition of knowledge regarding river thermal regimes and to invest more in the protection and restoration of these habitats. Regarding the potential impact of striped bass on Atlantic salmon, the population in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence, which spawns in the Miramichi River and subsequently inhabits Quebec waters, has experienced significant growth in recent years. Some studies indicate that predation on smolts during their migration can be significant in certain areas, particularly in the Miramichi. The situation in Quebec is different. The Federation, however, believes it is essential to continue scientific monitoring in all rivers where the presence of striped bass is increasing. However, any intervention must be based on rigorous understanding of the dynamics of this species, whose populations can also experience rapid declines. Particular attention should be paid to assessing the impact of the new commercial fishing quotas in place and the specific situation of the Miramichi River. We'd also like to draw the committee's attention to the striped bass population in the St. Lawrence River. And we cannot currently fish. And it will be good to do so before significant impacts are observed. Sea populations have increased significantly in several areas of the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, and concerns have been reported to us for several years. Although scientific research, knowledge remains incomplete, the available evidence justifies the continuation and intensification of research efforts. Atlantic salmon is more than an emblematic species. It constitutes an important part of the lives of these people, so it's important for us to act collectively. We need to step up our collaboration efforts, improve scientific understanding, and implement concrete measures that will support the recovery of this species for future generations.
I now go to Mr. White online for 5 minutes, please. Mr. White. Ooh, I can't see him.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Where the wild Atlantic salmon thrive, life thrives. They are a key indicator that we have clean air, clean water, healthy people, and pristine ecosystems. This magnificent creature is a symbol of hope and resilience for all of us. Newfoundland and Labrador has approximately 70% of the rivers in Atlantic Canada and also 70% of the stocks, salmon stocks. So if we can't get it right here, then I think the rest of the provinces and probably the world are doomed. There's a mental health aspect. I'm an educator in the school system, an angler for 40 years, and we're teaching the young kids about how to raise baby salmon, release them into the river. There's a mental health aspect of being in nature. So many factors and so much positivity come from the wild Atlantic salmon that it's invaluable. It's culturally authentic in Newfoundland and Labrador. My great-grandfather and grandfather were commercial salmon fishers on the North Atlantic Ocean. We have the indigenous folks who relied on the wild Atlantic salmon for centuries. And it's probably the healthiest food you can eat, a cold water salmon. Now, we know that Mother Nature bats last all the time. She's the final cleanup hitter, and she's in trouble. She needs our help because in recent years, the decimation of the wild Atlantic salmon globally, and especially in Newfoundland and Labrador, where I can see the numbers and the counters, and you talk to anglers on the river, that we're in trouble. And I guess that's why we're all here, to try to make a difference. I think we need a multi-prong approach with everybody. There's enough smart people in Canada, definitely in Department of Fisheries and Oceans and around this room to get the job done. So, Madam Chair, I want to thank you for this opportunity. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm sure I got some as a boot on the ground in nature and have studied it for, I guess, decades. Thank you very much.
Very much. And now I'm going to go to the question and answer period. The first round is 6 minutes, and the 6 minutes includes the question and answer. So everybody could be as concise as they possibly can. We begin with, for the Conservatives, Mr. Small. 6 minutes, please, Cliff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today to take part in this very important study. My question to Mr. White. Mr. White, have you had experience angling in southern Labrador in recent years?
Yes, I have, Mr. Small.
So with regards to striped bass, what have you observed and what have been the observations of your fellow anglers as far north as Mary's Harbour, for example?
Yeah, Mary's Harbour, I think the furthest noted striped bass was Port Hope Simpson. The herring nets were full 2 or 3 years ago. The commercial fisherman was full of sea bass or striped bass. It wasn't herring. I do know on the Forto River, I don't have the video, but I heard about it from anglers. The striped bass were coming in like predators, like sharks, and driving the big 2 and 3 pound trout up on the beach. They were beaching themselves to get away from the sea bass. Total predators. I've done a little bit of research on it too, the Miramichi. I know DFO called them a success story one time, but they're probably getting out of hand.
So let's get back to a recommendation from a 2019 FOPO study to remove the slot size on striped bass and to enable anglers to retain striped bass over 65 centimeters. What would be the impact on controlling bass population of removing more larger fish?
Well, I mean, the big spawners, they produce the most eggs, and if you remove them, then your bass population has no choice but to come down.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. White, in British Columbia, there's a big effort with salmon enhancement, and they've quite a number of hatcheries that support their $1.25 billion sports fishing industry. How do you feel about salmon enhancement in Newfoundland and Labrador and in the broader Atlantic region and in Quebec?
Well, I think in BC, they have what's called citizen science. I was reading that somewhere. They do some in Alaska, too, and I know Ontario for trout. But I think the hatcheries, I think they got 75, 77, something like that in BC. I think they would work with, the best available science, but you have to do it right. Like take the genetic strain from, let's say, 5 or 6 rivers, exploits, gander, Terra Nova, where there's counters, because the scientists can get the fish and incubate the eggs and then get the hatchery going. Because, we need numbers. The numbers tell the story. The numbers don't lie. And our numbers are low. A place, I think it was called Noel Paul Brook, Upper Exploits. They got that one going when the population in the Exploits River was down to 5,000. And then the numbers went up to 39, 40,000 one year. So we know it worked. But the seeding capacity of the Exploits River is like 300,000 fish plus. But then it just got canceled. So it does work, and I totally agree with hatcheries. We need our numbers back.
So I've heard from a constituent who'd like to get the Blackbrook enhancements facility reinstated that was shut down in the 90s, and DFO told him that the only way that they would approve salmon enhancement on a river is if that river's run was endangered of being extinct. Now, with the environmental factors that salmon are facing these days, especially with high temps in July and August, how do you feel about that attitude towards enhancement?
Well, if we wait until it's too late, I mean, salmon come in, 5-year life cycles. We cannot wait until it's too late. They got to start now. DFO, in my opinion, and I've been around, I know a lot of the old retired officers, once the commercial salmon fishery shut down in Newfoundland and Labrador, it's almost like they gave up caring or gave up taking it seriously in Newfoundland, Labrador, White Hills. So, I'm probably biased in that regard because I've seen so much of what doesn't work. And I think that's a bad attitude because we can't wait until they're endangered or extinct before we do something about it.
So let's talk about the existing brood stock of Atlantic salmon and how important it is to conserve what we have left. What can you tell us about the River Guardian program and is it adequate?
The Fishery Guardian program needs help. I know the minister just announced 81 million, 82. I'd take $1 million of that and give it right to the contractor who does it for overtime. Watching the nets, heavy poaching Newfoundland and Labrador in coastal and in the rivers. The Guardians, they're the boots on the ground. They're doing the best they can with what they got. They need some serious help. I think they should be either federally funded or provincially funded, not contracted out. But they get the job done.
Excuse me, Mr. White, what would you like to see their season, their beginning and ending season be for their operations?
February 1st, when ice fishing opens in Newfoundland and Labrador, and probably last of October, first week of November, after the salmon have spawned.
And what do you think about the accuracy of numbers of salmon that are being reported as caught in Saint-Pierre-Miquelon, which is a French colony?
We got to question those numbers because I don't think it's accurate.
Thank you. The time is up. I now go to, for the Liberals, Mr. Cormier, 6 minutes, please, Serge.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Alors, merci.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. This is a study that I proposed. I want to thank all my colleagues who supported me in this study for us to look into the decline of the Atlantic salmon for us to find solutions. As you know, there's an urgent need for action. There are lots of factors involved, and I hope that we can find answers to our questions and solutions to the problems facing this very important species, important for everyone around the table here. As I said earlier, I've been fishing Atlantic salmon for 25 years recreationally, and I have great memories over the years. I met so many people in this field. And today, looking at the situation of the species, it breaks my heart. And that is why we want to learn from you. We want to find out what we can do better to improve the situation. Let me start with you, Miss Bergeron and Mr. Fisher. A while ago, you talked about the causes. What are the three main causes, in your opinion, for the decline of Atlantic salmon? An important nuance that we must note. It takes a lot of factors, as you said, but what we saw with the returns of the juvenile salmon in 2023-2024 was sudden and abrupt decline. From that time, we believe that there was a main cause. Well, we all agree that it's probably related to climate change. But that being said, that's the indirect cause. But what's the direct cause? Is it lack of food? Is it migration because of the temperature of water? There's a lot of information. One thing for sure, we have had very productive rivers that had salmon going downstream, but the year after, there was no return. I only have 6 minutes, so I want you to tell us three main causes. You've talked about climate change. What will be the other cause? Mortality at sea. So we need to continue studying the issue. Predation, whether it be from stripe, bass, or seal, all that is exploding. And of course, we must continue improving the productivity of our rivers, particularly when it comes to the temperature. We need to better identify our thermal refuges, protect them, or restore them. Now, let's take some of these three causes, all related to the best science, the effects of what you've just told us. In Quebec, it's managed by the government of Quebec, your rivers. Now, do you feel that at that level, the government responsible for your rivers has access to the right science? Is there proper collaboration to identify the causes that you've just mentioned and to find solutions so that the species can recover? Are you doing that with them? Over the past few years, from what we've experienced, we feel that there's real engagement and there's more work going on between the provincial government and the federal government, and this is desirable. There's increased involvement by community groups like us, non-profits, and better collaboration with different academics. So there is improvement. But there's still a lot of work to do. We must continue down that road. Clearly, given the scope of the situation, right now we do not have the tools to meet our objectives. Now, this is a very important point. Let's come back to mortality at sea. Many groups and salmon associations like you have talked about. I know that studies were done at some point. I think we even tagged some salmon to find out where their locations were and their mortality, why they were being lost at some locations. Did you participate in some of these studies looking into the mortality at sea for salmon? Yes, we worked together with government and non-governmental researchers who participated in some of these tagging studies for salmon, identifying migratory routes, the details of those routes, identify locations where it's unlikely to identify mortality causes. At the Strait of Belle-Île, the work was done there, so apparently there's a lot going on there. Now, are those causes caused by the temperatures of water? Were the causes determined and known? Right now, we have theories. Of course, climate change anomalies could also be associated with that. There's also predation, as you mentioned, which is an important factor. There are also questions to find out whether there are some diseases involved. Are there elements involved that we do not know? The changing conditions in the river, could they cause the fact that salmons that are migrating are less healthy than they were? So that's what we're working on now. Yes, we have those 4 theories, but we do not have any answers because we need to continue finding those solutions.
I now go to Mr. Duchesne. 6 minutes, Alexei. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Bonjour.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, witnesses. I have a question for the Federation from Quebec. Everyone agrees on the fact that in Quebec, the situation is concerning for Atlantic salmon. There's a steep decline, and there are different causes that you've mentioned: upstream migration, predation. I would like you to tell us what we need to do to act and save the Atlantic salmon. Now, if we look into Atlantic predation, have you done anything to find out if there's data on the juvenile salmon that is caught up? Yes, this is our 2nd year. It takes collaboration from DFO to look into bycatch for juvenile salmon. Most of these juvenile salmon end up in the Strait of Belle-Île during a period of about 10 days. And this is not very costly. And if we identify these, we'll be able to assess their state of health, as my colleague said, to better understand why there's the mortality rate that we have, why they didn't return. We made that request. The response seemed to be favorable from the minister. Are you able to carry out tests on the juvenile salmon this year? It seems that we have a green light in Newfoundland and Quebec. Now, we need to see how efficient that will be done. But I have hope that this year we will be able to harvest some specimens. Now, from those specimens or samples, what results do we expect to obtain? The general state of health. As my colleague said, if there's any viral load coming from aquaculture farms, is there a nutrition problem? We know that the Gulf is changing. Is there also a significant drop in the feeding for the juvenile salmon? Because they spend a lot of time in the Gulf of St. Lawrence before they come to the Strait of Belle-Île. So we need a temporary sample that is studied year after year to better understand the situation when we see a steep decline, as we saw in 2023, 2024. That will help us identify what really happened. I was reading the Atlantic Salmon Management Plan for 2025-2026, and according to the document, the main cause seems to be mortality at sea, but we know that there are other causes, and many people have talked about that, particularly predation. When it comes to the population of striped bass, that is significant. What do you recommend? When it comes to the population in the south of the Gulf, we need to keep an eye on that. The population is exploding. We are afraid that the presence of the striped bass on our rivers is increasingly affecting our salmon population. The sooner they come, the more they increase and the more problems are created. This is disturbing. We need to follow the situation closely. Now, what should we do? Do we increase recreational fishing? Should we pivot to commercial fishing? We have very little control over that situation. I think the control lies with our colleagues, because when we look at the population of the south of the Gulf, it's more what is happening in Miramichi. So we don't really control what is happening there except for recreational fishing. Besides the seal, which is another predator, which eats the salmon, what are you proposing? Should we increase seal harvesting? Could this balance the situation? Absolutely. This could help if we increase seal harvesting. This could diversify economies, irrespective of its impact on Atlantic salmon. Seal harvesting should be enhanced. There's also work underway that started a few years ago by the Institut de la Montagne that wants to better understand the impact of seal predation on Atlantic salmon. We ran into lots of difficulty to obtain samples. You know, it's very complex to try to harvest seal or to get samples from them.
Il y a une stratégie.
A strategy was recently announced in March, more than 80 million to stabilize and recover salmon stocks. Ms. Becheron, a while ago, you said you don't have tools to meet your ambitions. Why did you say that? Clearly, funding is welcome. There are lots of priorities that are already known. We know what to do. Unfortunately, 82 million is a lot, but at the same time, it's not enough. So we need to optimize our work. We need a short-term vision. We need to take certain measures, seeding, support to heal our populations and rivers. But we also need a longer-term vision. When we talk about climate change, the importance of understanding the thermal dynamic, to know that in 10 years, 20 years, salmons coming need to have a place to cool off when they come up the river. So these are concrete examples that we can use to support measures being taken on the ground with organizations working there to promote the presence of salmon. At the same time, work with researchers, organizations, be they provincial or national, who are already working on that and whose priority is to identify research so that we can take better decisions tomorrow.
We now go to a second round. This is now a 5-minute round. And I start with, for the Conservatives, Mr. Bragdon. For 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to each of the witnesses today. Thank you for being here and sharing from your expertise and experience. And I want to direct most of my questions to you, Mr. Grubin. Thank you so much, Chief, for being here and taking the time and sharing the impact this decision is having on your peoples and on the Willistic Nation. And we value your input and appreciate your insights. So I want to start off by asking, were you as First Nation and you as Chief of that First Nation consulted or notified of the decision regarding the closure of the Biodiversity Center in your community?
We were not. Thank you. We were not.
So you found out, like the rest of us, via a press release or the notification that went out publicly?
Yes. Yes.
So have you had any meetings or ability to communicate, obviously, how you're feeling with the government or with the minister to encourage a change of course here?
Yes, we had very productive meetings with Minister Thompson, one of the first ministers willing to meet with Willistic chiefs on the East Coast, and we felt the meeting went very well and was very productive.
Okay. And are you anticipating that hopefully, and I should ask you, Chief, what do you feel needs to happen to make this right, to get this decision changed or reversed? I'd like to have your insights as to what you feel would help, and then we'll get into kind of the specifics around the salmon species as well. So,
thank you. Yes, our ask is to extend the timeline of the closure of the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility. additionally is to keep the programs like supplementation program or the live gene bank program that is essentially keeping the species of interbay fundy Atlantic salmon alive, that specific genetic vulnerable species. And our ask is to keep the programs running and to extend the timeline, because if the facility closes as it stands, there will be no salmon above the dam and likely downstream in 2 to 3 years.
It's my understanding, too, Chief, that you folks work closely with Tobic First Nation as well, and the efforts that they have on the Tobic River in a bit of a hatchery and restoration of the salmon species there. And my understanding has been some encouraging signs. Can you speak to that and how the Biodiversity Center in Mactaquac plays a role in that operation as well?
Yes, I want to take this opportunity to introduce elder from our community, from Village Patrick Polchis, and take this opportunity to introduce Chad Solomon. Chad is a technician who is our only personnel who works at the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility, and I believe he'd be more vetted to answer that question.
And sorry, can you repeat the question, sir?
Sure. Mr. Solomon, just in regards to, I know Tobic First Nation is doing a lot of work on the Tobic River as well, with some hatchery programming and salmon species restoration efforts. And it obviously works in collaboration with your efforts at Kingsclear First Nation and the Mactaquac Biodiversity Center. So can you speak to how important both are? And I understand there's been some encouraging signs with returns in Tobic First Nation, which is in no small part due to your efforts. So can you speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we work closely with Tobic and with the hydro dam right there in Kingsclear and Village, that we are the ones that are moving the Atlantic salmon above the dam and to get to Tobic. And if this facility closes, there won't be no more way of transporting them up over the dam.
And it would be your estimation, Chief and witnesses, that if this facility closes, it would lead to the demise of the salmon species in the Woolstock or the St. John River.
Correct.
Yes, it jeopardizes. I actually want to read a quote here from Chief Dan George, if I may. And this speaks to our obligation and why we're here. As the time will soon be here when my grandchild will long for the cry of a loon, the flash of a salmon, the whisper of spruce needles, or the screech of an eagle. But he will not make friends with any of these creatures, and when his heart aches with longing, he will curse me. Have I done all to keep the air fresh? Have I cared enough about the water? Have I left the eagle to soar in freedom, and have I done everything I could to earn my grandchild's fondness? Now, for us, this is on the brink of extinction, this species, and if the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility closes, that will likely take place for this specific genome. And that's why we're here today as Wolastoqawia. We are people of the river, and this was a once plentiful species that roared and thundered upriver, and now it is facing extinction. And I would allow Tyke Patrick Polchis to close with a statement, if I
think
can.
the time is up. You can come back another time. There's going to be a round going here. So, Mr. Cormier for the Liberals, 5 minutes, please, Serge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, thanks for being here. Before talking about the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility, just maybe the same question that I asked the other witness over there. What do you think are the 3 primary causes of the decline of Atlantic salmon, in your opinion?
I think our partners here touched on that really well, but I think a missing link, I'm an evaluate, and a missing link to this is maybe the noise pollution on decibels of large-scale shipping. And I believe that it is disrupting migratory paths, and I think that should be explored on how industry and shipping in the Bay of Fundy and in the oceans, specifically where we're seeing a lot of decline, might be impacting through sound. And if we look at studies on how that's disrupting migration paths and communication, it's disrupting their ecosystems as well as other animals and marine life in those ecosystems as well. I think that's just a factor that I would like to pose.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So coming back to the biodiversity facility that you've touched on, look, we want to hear both sides of the medal here. So when I look at the decision that the government made about closing the biodiversity, one of the reason that DFO gave was with all the investment through the 25 plus years of this facility, the return of the salmon was very, very low. What do you think of that observation or that reason that DFO is giving?
I think they're highlighting and trying to draw the justification of the closure. However, I think that the returns, the biodiversity facility is designed. It's now a mitigation effort, and it's specific to us now because it's preserving and protecting that specific genome in those specific species, and that's why it's important for us, especially as Willistokawiak, because these are species that sustain our people for generations across time and space, and they're a part of who we are. They're our relatives. And 70% of our language is verb-based. We don't separate ourselves or objectify. And so they're our kin, they're our relatives. And to us as Willistokawiak, that's a cultural keystone, Salmonar. It's actually on the crest of the New Brunswick flag. And this is affecting just our communities across, not just Willistokawiak, but also our communities here in New Brunswick and others in the region.
So how many salmon each year they're returning back on average? Do you know the number?
Yes.
So on last year, we had 17 adult salmon, wild salmon returned, but 379 smolts returned, wild smolts returned to the hatchery.
So this is for last year, you said?
For
right?
last year, correct.
Okay. So in the past year before that, were the numbers still almost the same on average?
Almost the same, maybe a little lower, yes.
Okay. And you said that you had some meeting recently about, the future of the facility, what's going to happen next. So in terms of the new investment that the government just put forward, the $81 million plus, there's some more money that will be put in for some groups. Is there something in there that will maybe help offsetting disclosure for your community? Is it something that you touch with the minister on?
Across multiple communities and across different areas that money distributed, we believe we do need an extended timeline on how the Matakwak Biodiversity Facility to mitigate the measures. We would our request with the government is to extend the timeline and in consideration of the funds that are to come, where our hopes is that we can come up with a tangible, concrete, strategic plan to utilize those funds as well as keep this biodiversity facility open.
Okay. And
30 seconds.
Regarding the return, I was saying that DFO is saying that there's a low return for the amount that we're putting in this facility each year. Even if there are low return of wild salmon is better than return of zero salmon, right? But how can we increase the return in your opinion? Because you name some factors that the declining is happening because of some factors, but what will be, a solution on your end to have a little bit more return?
There's currently an upward trend right now in the last few years.
Okay.
That's it. I now go to Monsieur Deschênes for 2 minutes et demie.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Chair. I still have questions for the Quebec Federation of Atlantic Salmon. In the strategy that was announced, there's a great opportunity, $82 million available. But what we are being told is that we can't take action everywhere. Efforts will need to be targeted. So where should we focus our efforts for the salmon to be saved? First of all, it's important to target areas where there are already agencies, organizations, people engaged with salmon. Yes, we're doing this for salmon, but it's being done through people and for people. 85% of salmon goes to their initial breeding ground to spawn. So we need to look into the causes of a specific salmon population to restore it, and also fund agencies that create networking opportunities so that locally these organizations who are experts, be they indigenous organizations, community organizations, should be able to work together so that we can look into the local denominator, all working together. Is the government doing enough to support you? No. More can be done. Yes, I think it's a responsibility of the government, of governments, looking into the scarcity of the Atlantic salmon. It has to do with the health of our ecosystem. We have a social and collective responsibility for our children, for the future. So I think the federal government needs to increase its efforts to save Atlantic salmon through funds, through human efforts, through a real desire to provide ambitious objectives. So you are saying we need to restore habitat and continue studies at sea and look into predation as well. Yes, of course, it's important to have an agile structure that will be able to support knowledge, local knowledge, and look into the local priorities, the specificities of each of the rivers. As I said, there are, however, some cross-cutting issues being faced by lots of provinces across the country. So there are some key themes, be it predation, climate change, the impact of forestry, and so on. So we should be able to network, develop skills locally, relying on the best sciences.
Very much. I'm going to go now to Mr. Arnold for the Conservatives for 5 minutes, please. Mal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all the witnesses for being here. This is important. Salmon are very important on all coasts. Chief, you mentioned that you'd had a positive meeting with the Minister Thompson. Did she provide any concrete commitments for our actions that could save the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility?
The conversation that we had was very helpful and productive, and I believe we're waiting for an immediate response, a response in the interim. That's before the closure.
But no immediate commitments.
No.
Okay, thank you. In looking at the government's Canadian National Strategy to ensure the future of Atlantic salmon, dated 2004 to 2036, I picked up on a line that has said, it will not be possible to invest everywhere. To me, that sounds like a government giving up on salmon. I come from BC, from the interior, and there were no salmon in the BC portion of the Okanagan system for over 50 years. Work with the First Nations there, the Okanagan Nations Alliance across Canada-US borders, established a hatchery there, and now there are salmon returning on their own all the way up into Okanagan Lake. Hundreds and hundreds of kilometers up the river where there hadn't been salmon for 50 years. How important is it to the salmon populations, to your nation, that genetic stock remain viable in some way so that when the other factors that are impacting the populations, so that stock can be there to rebuild what was there?
Yeah, I'm going to allow Elder Patrick Bolges to answer that.
Thank you for the question. To be concise, it's extremely important. A big part of the work, of course, at the Mactaquac Biodiversity Facility is identifying the genetic strains of fish that would be well upstream of us. Just as an example, thank you, Mr. White and the Quebec Federation for their answering questions about the demise of salmon or the possibility of that in their areas. In our case, if you add in 3 hydroelectric facilities on the river. On top of all the issues that they've talked about, it makes it extremely important. It adds weight to it. For me, it kind of defies logic that the most endangered salmon have not seen any attention. In fact, the only attention they saw was the government shutting down the biodiversity facility. It doesn't really make sense to me, but that's where I am.
Thank you. That sounds similar to a situation we have in British Columbia right now. We have volunteer organizations that run a hatchery in the Upper Fraser. They have been working with habitat biologists and habitat restoration people within the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for years. They have maintained a facility that has continued the viability of a specific type of salmon, S2 or stream type Chinook salmon. DFO just announced the cuts to those habitat biologists in that area. They now have to travel hundreds of kilometers from Kamloops into that area. Does this sound like a troubling trend to you, that salmon, wild salmon in some of these most endangered areas are being put at risk by the decisions?
1 minute.
Yes, it certainly does. And it's interesting that it's that broad, that even on the West Coast you're encountering that sort of thing. And I can't overstate the importance of it to the Wolastoq and the Wolastoqey people, that salmon have been, for 11,000 years that we've been on the river, a mainstay of our economy. But that's not just that. We were talking earlier about everybody in the Maritimes. Your families grew up on salmon, all of us. Everybody who's in the eastern part of Canada, your history goes back to productive and healthy salmon populations. And it does seem to me that DFO is not applying enough interest in maintaining salmon populations everywhere.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I now go to Mr. Connors for 5 minutes, please. Paul?
Thank you. I'm going to be sharing my time with Mr. Cormier as well. Mr. White, we've talked about predation of the salmon. You mentioned striped bass. Is there any other predation in Newfoundland, Labrador that you would consider?
Thank you, Mr. Connors, for the question. Ken McDonald, your former colleague, I guess he was the MP before you. He was a great advocate for Guardians and our wild salmon in Newfoundland. Other predators, definitely seals. In Newfoundland and Labrador, we also have the shags, the cormorants, the seabirds. They eat a lot of the young, the babies, the small. I've seen them up in the rivers, like taking the par and up back and forth and back and forth. They can't get enough. There are two big ones for certain.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned about a multi-prong approach. What would be your top 3 things that you think should be done?
Well, in Newfoundland and Labrador, I can speak there. Like if we're going to do salmon, first of all, CPE, conservation protection, I'm going to add the E to DFO for what's called enhancement. If we're going to do enhancement, first of all, we got to protect what we have first. We don't want to wipe that out and then have to rebuild. Let's protect what we got. So that would be, the fishery guardians, the fishery officers, the local angling community. We can retain a salmon. I would say keep that. Do not get rid of the tag, because more anglers on the river prevents the poaching, the netting, by in rural Newfoundland, for example. Then we look at getting, fish tanks, hatch and release programs, get them into schools, teach the young people all about, wild salmon conservation. They are the future. So, it's their future, it's their project, their habitat. Can you repeat the question one more time for me? You asked for 3.
What would
priorities?
be you said a multi-prong approach. What would be your 3 solutions, or any solutions?
There you go. So, and the other thing is leadership. Leadership. I know the government is working like that, but having more anglers, having more guardians, having more young people sit around these tables, because at the end of the day, it falls on leadership. And I know the politicians, I mean, they do the best they can with what they got, but sometimes, in my opinion, the bureaucracy gets in the way and it stifles stuff. And, the decision makers sometimes rely on that versus, getting a multi-pronged or answers from everybody else who are invested in wild salmon.
Thanks very much. I'm going to pass to Serge now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Chief, I'm going to go back to you if you don't mind. I asked all of you at the beginning, like, some causes of the decline of Atlantic salmon. And look, I think it's a difficult question, but we need to ask some of those difficult questions, because we will need to do a report after that and put that in the report and what we heard, right? So, and again, like, I'm not questioning at all the treaty or indigenous fishing right that you have, but a lot of stakeholders sometime in this recreational fisheries are saying that sometimes nets that are set by First Nation in some river are the reason why we see a decline or low return of Atlantic salmon. How do you respond to those concerns of those people that are targeting this as one of the reasons, as many causes that we just talked about, predation, climate change? It's out there. It's some people are saying this. So how do you respond to them about, like, when they're targeting you on this issue?
Yes, our people have fished since time immemorial and sustained these distinct species across different rivers and watersheds for generations, and none of them have gone extinct. Mm-hmm. And I will allow Patrick, our elder, also, who used to work in fisheries for decades, to expand.
Yeah, good thing.
I would just say that that's always the case, that we kind of get looked at a little harshly for doing what we've done since time immemorial. In my case, on my river, it would be important to remember that once commerce hit the shores of our river, i.e. lumber and logging and all the other fishing activities, etc., we were put off the water completely. Our river was choked with logs. You couldn't fish, and the fish probably couldn't move either. It was huge business for many, many years, and it's well documented. So to come back at us with, maybe you're taking too much or something along those lines isn't really fair. Commerce has done us in. Commercial fishing fleets make us look silly. We get on the river and maybe take 10 salmon. They've got huge nets out at sea taking fish.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Thank you for
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And we've now finished this hour of witnesses, and I'm going to thank the witnesses who came. I learned a heck of a lot from listening to you, so thank you for your expertise and your ideas, because always when you have a problem, it's good to hear from the people on the ground what the solutions could be. Thank you very much. And so now I want to suspend in order to move to the next panel. Thank you very much. Order. And I'm just going to help the new witnesses welcome, but I'm going to give you a little bit of housekeeping. At the bottom of your screen, if you are virtual, there will be a little icon that looks like a globe. You can press on that and get the ability to listen to translations. All comments should be addressed through the chair. I want to remind you that you're going to be asked questions in English or French, so please put on your earpieces so you can get translation if you need it. And I just wanted to also say that I will give you a shout out when you have a minute left or 30 seconds left. Now, the witnesses, you are going to have 5 minutes for your group, not for each person, but for your group. So you have a decision obviously made about who is going to do that. And as I said, I'll give you a shout out. So I want to thank you for coming, Monsieur Pierre Damour, biologist and salmon fishing guide. We have from the Atlantic Fisheries Federation, we have Nathan Wilbur, President, and Neville Crabb, Vice President of Communications. And from the Miramichi Salmon Association, we have William Dalton, President, and Mark Hambrook, President Emeritus, and thereby video conference. So we shall begin, and I will start with Mr. Damour for 5 minutes, please.
I can start right now. Je peux partir tout de suite. Donc,
I'll start right away. Let me start with a gift. I have a gift for people from different sides of the government. I have salmon here, sculpted by myself. Small salmon that I give to harvesters. When I harvest a salmon, I give out one of these. Because before, people captured salmon and they went back home with their salmon and they showed it to their parents and they ate it during the feast. It was a time of joy, but now we're dying. There's no more salmon. Everything is finished. So when I see young harvesters who harvest their first salmon, it's very sad. There's no longer any custom. So when we have the great opportunity, I want the person that harvests their first salmon to remember, because it's very important emotionally. It's part of the culture. We are losing the salmon culture. We are losing this because there's no more salmon to harvest. There's no more salmon. I came here to tell you that we're dying. We are dying in the Ristigouche River. 500 jobs, $15 million. We cannot lose that. If we lose that, we're losing everything. What is interesting to know is that the river is good for those of us from the Gaspé region and the Gastigouche River, but it's also good for you, because in my life as a guide, I've guided many people who were politicians, people like yourselves. I saw you come to the Ristigouche River. You were very tense because your lives are stressful. You have to keep running and rushing. I saw you get to the river, and after one day on the water, I saw that you were being healed by the water. You felt the pressure you had on your shoulders reducing. So the river is extraordinary. When you capture a salmon, it's wonderful. Why do people leave places all over the world to come and harvest salmon? Let me explain something. A fishing line is an electric line. When you harvest a salmon, it's as if you are attaching yourself to wild nature, its perfection. The salmon that is harvested is the best. It's a tiny salmon that was able to survive the natural predators in the rivers. So it's a small salmon that survived the seals, survived all the predators that wanted to eat it. They went to Greenland and they came back. And then they were fished by the Greenland harvesters, by the harvesters from Newfoundland and all the other harvesters until they came back. So when you capture a salmon, you are capturing the best of the best, the one that was able to survive. So when you capture your salmon, it's exceptional. There's a battle. The river calms you and heals you, and salmon gives you exceptional energy. which is like medicine. So if we lose our salmon, it's as if we were losing something that was magical, that would enable us to have a beautiful life. So I came here to tell you that if we lose our salmon as Canadians, we are losing one of the most important things we need for our mental health that helps us survive this earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to go now to the Atlantic Salmon Federation, and I don't know who's going to be speaking for you. Mr. Wilbur, thank you very much. For 5 minutes, please.
Madame Chair, members of the committee, merci pour l'invitation aujourd'hui.
Thank you for inviting us today.
Wilbur, President of the Atlantic Salmon Federation. I'm joined by Neville Crabb, our Vice President of Communications and Special Projects. ASF is a 78-year-old conservation organization dedicated to wild Atlantic salmon with the goal of doubling annual salmon returns to 1 million. We work throughout Eastern Canada and internationally, conducting research, advocacy, on-the-ground conservation, always in partnership with Indigenous communities, governments, grassroots organizations, and scientists. Some of our most unique work has included creative conservation agreements with the Greenlanders to help keep harvests low at sea. This iconic fish drives over $200 million in annual spending, supports 3,800 jobs in Eastern Canada, but much more than that, it is central to the cultural fabric of the region. The status of Atlantic salmon is mixed. In the north, Labrador and northern Quebec remain a global stronghold, but populations in the Gulf region, Newfoundland, the Gaspé, and the Maritimes need urgent help. 3 major government-led studies in the past decade have produced a combined 90 recommendations to DFO. Many have not been implemented, and the salmon community has grown frustrated. But we are optimistic. Canada has recently released its national strategy for Atlantic salmon with over $80 million to accompany it. ASF has pledged $25 million in privately raised funding towards the strategy's goals for a total of over $100 million in new investment. I want to sincerely thank members of Parliament, members of this committee, the Government of Canada for this historic commitment. Atlantic salmon face many pressures: climate change, aquaculture, predation, barriers to fish passage, land use, and low marine survival. ASF works on all of these issues. One fundamental principle in our approach is to focus investment where it will have the greatest impact. And on this point, I'd like to give the committee a concrete example of how you can help increase the number of wild Atlantic salmon returning to Canadian rivers by tens of thousands, and it won't cost the Government of Canada a cent. Some watersheds have an outsized level of importance, ecologically, culturally, economically. The Miramichi was once the most productive Atlantic salmon river in North America, but over the last 15 years, adult salmon have fallen from 80,000 to 5,000. This decline has been driven primarily by one factor: striped bass predation. During the growth of striped bass from 3,000 spawners in the 90s to 500,000 today, our tracking research has shown a collapse in salmon smolt survival from 70% down to less than 10% through the Miramichi estuary, where these salmon overlap with aggregating striped bass. In other words, juvenile salmon simply are not making it to sea. If you'd like to see what this looks like, I have emailed you a short video. Striped bass are a native species. They have a place in the ecosystem, but balance is needed. This is our #1 message today. We urge DFO to establish an ecosystem-based management target of 100,000 spawning striped bass. And to achieve this goal by growing the existing Indigenous commercial fishery and by allowing bycatch in the Gaspereau fishery in the Gulf. This would dramatically improve salmon survival on the Miramichi and reduce predation pressure on other Gulf rivers like the Restigouche, Cascapedia, Marguerite, while continuing to conserve striped bass and its thriving commercial, Indigenous, and recreational fisheries. These are all positive outcomes, and it's a win-win approach. The current DFO limit reference point of 330,000 striped bass makes Miramichi salmon recovery impossible. DFO has its own policy stating that rebuilding one predator population cannot come at the detriment of other species. We are urging DFO to apply its ecosystem approach to fisheries management, because the department has a responsibility to conserve both Atlantic salmon and striped bass. In conclusion, to put this opportunity into perspective, restoring the Miramichi salmon population to 50,000 would generate gains 5 times greater than the entire Greenland salmon harvest on one river system. This does not require new funding or more science. It requires fisheries management decisions right now. This is a solvable issue in domestic waters. Madam Chair, the Government of Canada has made a historic investment in Atlantic salmon recovery. With the right focus, we can ensure this species thrives for generations to come. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. I now go to the Miramichi Salmon Association. Who is speaking for you? Yes, you are.
Yep.
Mr. Dalton?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Butch Dalton. I'm the president of the Miramichi Salmon Association and also the New Brunswick Salmon Council. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Mark Hambrook, President Emeritus. I'm here to provide the perspective of those working directly with Atlantic salmon conservation and speak specifically to the factors affecting salmon recovery in the Miramichi. Atlantic salmon populations throughout Atlantic Canada have declined dramatically over the past several decades, despite investments in research, habitat restoration, conservation measures, and management interventions. There's no single cause for the decline. Atlantic salmon face multiple pressures throughout their life cycle, including changing ocean conditions, poor marine survival, warming rivers, habitat degradation, and specifically for this committee, predation. The challenge is that many of these pressures are occurring simultaneously, making recovery increasingly difficult. From the perspective of those working in the Miramichi, one of the most significant ecological changes over the past 2 decades has been the remarkable increase in striped bass abundance. Those of us who spend our lives on the river have witnessed this change firsthand. Striped bass are now found throughout much of the watershed, including areas where they were rarely encountered historically, and they overlap extensively with Atlantic salmon smolts during one of the most vulnerable periods of the Atlantic salmon lifestyle, the migration from freshwater to the ocean. Importantly, these concerns are not based solely on observation from anglers or conservation groups. Scientific studies conducted by universities, conservation organizations, and Fisheries and Oceans Canada had confirmed that striped bass, in fact, do consume Atlantic salmon smolts. Smolts have been found in striped bass stomach contexts, and acoustic telemetry studies have repeatedly identified the lower Miramichi and estuary as a major mortality bottleneck for migrating smolts. Recent studies using advanced predation detection tags have provided even stronger evidence. These studies indicate that substantial proportion of smolt losses are the result of predation by fish, and that much of the mortality occurs in the same area where striped bass are concentrated during spawning. Experimental work has also demonstrated that smolt survival improves significantly when fish are transported around this section of the river rather than migrating through it naturally. Taken together, the science tells us that the question is no longer whether predation occurs. The question is whether the current abundance of striped bass is creating mortality levels that are limiting salmon recovery. From our perspective, that concern is legitimate and it deserves serious consideration. The Miramichi Salmon Association operates one of the longest-running Atlantic salmon monitoring programs in North America. For many years, our data suggested that freshwater production was not the primary problem. The river continued to produce substantial numbers of smolt, but too few of them survived to adults. That observation closely aligns with scientific studies showing that mortality is concentration during migration through the estuary and early marine environment. What is particularly concerning is that we are now beginning to see signs that production itself may be declining. Preliminary results from this year's smolt monitoring on the Northwest Miramichi indicate substantially fewer out-migrating smolts. In addition, thermal refuges that once held thousands of juvenile salmon during periods of extreme temperatures are now supporting very few fish. And while these observations warrant further study, they suggest that the population is becoming increasingly stressed. Current management measures have not halted the decline of Atlantic salmon. And while predator management alone will not restore salmon populations, predator-prey interactions must become a much more important component in a recovery plan. Likewise, seal predation, marine survival, climate change, habitat degradation must all be considered as part of a comprehensive strategy. In the near term, we need to continue investing in monitoring, habitat restoration, and conservation hatcheries. We also need to make better use of the scientific information that is already available and adopt a more adaptive and ecosystem-based approach to management. From a population perspective, there is a growing concern that Atlantic salmon in the Miramichi may have declined to a point where natural recovery will be extremely difficult without intervention. Increasing the number of smolts entering the system through conservation supplementation may be necessary to rebuild abundance and improve resilience while broader recovery measures are implemented. In closing, I'm not here to suggest that striped bass are the sole cause of Atlantic salmon declines. They are not. However, the scientific evidence combined with what we are observing on the river indicates that predation by striped bass is one of several factors affecting smolt survival and should be considered within any serious Atlantic salmon recovery strategy.
Thank you very much. I now go to the question and answer segment. And we will start with a 6-minute segment, beginning for the Conservatives, Mr. Small.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is to Mr. Dalton. I just heard you reference lower production on the Miramichi this season, and you spoke a little bit about hatcheries, and we could get back to that in a second. But before that, there was a report in 2019 about striped bass and the impacts of striped bass, and recommendations were made. And there was a key recommendation that keeps coming back to me from stakeholders in your region and throughout the Maritimes about the slot size being changed so that fish larger than 65 centimeters would be able to be retained. Did that happen?
Did not.
So what would be the impact on the production of striped bass if that recommendation had been followed by this government?
Well, I mean, if you're harvesting these mature spawning fish, you would have a reduction in egg deposition and consequently, possibly reduce the population of striped bass.
And there was quite a call in that report for increased harvesting of striped bass. Since 2019, what's your opinion on the increased fishing of striped bass? Has it been significant or has it been insignificant?
I think it's been insignificant. The recreational fishery was increased by, from 3 to 4 fish that you could retain in between the 50 to 65 centimeter slot size, and the First Nations commercial fishery was implemented but was not fully realized by First Nations. So we're hoping that the 175,000 quota this year will be realized, and that hopefully that will have an impact in reducing striped bass populations.
And now on the proliferation of striped bass, I don't know if you heard Mr. White earlier talk about the sightings of large amounts of striped bass and actually people catching them in southern and up to mid-Labrador coasts. So we often hear that striped bass are a Miramichi problem, but do you think that the bass are proliferating into many watersheds? And well, we know what's happening in the St. Lawrence River. So what do you think about the proliferation of these bass?
I think they're everywhere, and I don't believe that we really have a handle on the population size. Even, notable population ecologists that I speak with, have a hard time determining, what the population actually is. So I think it's getting bigger. I'm not a population ecologist myself, but I know it's hugely problematic.
So until the government heeds the recommendations of the 2019 bass study, do you think there's much point in investing in hatcheries in watersheds where the bass are so prolific? Or do we need to deal with the bass first?
I believe that it's something that should happen simultaneously, particularly in the Miramichi. Our salmon population is reduced to a point, it's just a fraction of what it used to be. And my personal belief is that if we should be reducing the bass population and also implementing supplementation programs where they're merited. So,
thank you very much. My next question is for
1 minute
for Mr. Wilbur. Mr. Wilbur, in the 2017 study on Atlantic salmon, there was a recommendation that the government of Canada lead a delegation to go to Greenland to lobby on behalf of wild Atlantic salmon. Did that happen?
Canada, along with other countries, meet annually at the North Atlantic Salmon Conservation Organization meeting each June, which just happened last week. And every few years, a new quota for Greenland is negotiated. And I can speak confidently in saying that Greenland has done an excellent job reducing their fishery from a substantial level down to 30 tons, which is about 9,000 salmon, and those come from Canada, the U.S., and Europe. Usually 2/3 of them are Canadian. And so they've reduced their harvest, and they've implemented a very robust reporting system, than 90% reporting. So they've done a good job.
I've got one more little quick one for you. St. Pierre-Miquelon is harvesting reportedly around 1,500 tons. Or 150 tons, sorry, of Atlantic salmon. I'm not sure if I got that figure right, but anyway, you can correct me, and I don't mind. There's reports of salmon coming ashore in Newfoundland from that harvest and being sold on the black market in Newfoundland and Labrador. Do you think the St. Pierre and Miquelon is accurately reporting what they're catching? Is it possible that they could be overfishing our stock in French waters?
You have 30 seconds to answer. Sorry.
We have to rely on anybody reporting into NASCO and ICES that their country's reports are as accurate as possible. And I will correct that figure. It's just over 1 ton harvested St. Pierre and Miquelon, so 300 to 500 salmon.
Thank you.
Now go to for the Liberals for 6 minutes. Serge Cormier. 6 minutes, please, Serge.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come back to you, Mr. Amo, but I spent a day on the river with you. For the other witnesses.
Well, thanks for being here, and to you also, Mr. Dalton with the Miramichi Salmon Association. So I know you were in the room before. I'm not going to ask you like maybe the 3 causes that you think, because it was probably one for all of you was striped bass. But I want to go back to Greenland for a second, okay? So yes, as we know, Greenland reduced the amount of salmon that they were allowed to catch, but it's still 30,000 tons. And you're saying it was 900 salmon, I think. Those 900 salmon are returning to some of our river, as you probably know, spawning, produce eggs. Do you think we're doing enough to, make understand Greenland that, we are at the point now with Atlantic salmon that is on such a decline that maybe, it's time to have a little pause? And do you have talk with them on this issue, like having maybe to, hey, have a pause, no fish for maybe a couple of years, just to see if we will have more return?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question from the member. And Greenland, as I mentioned, has done an excellent job reducing their fishery from 1,500 tons in the 70s down to 30 tons and about 9,000 salmon. To put this into perspective, the returns to Canada in recent years have been about 600,000, somewhere between 400 and 700,000, depending on the year. So what we're talking about here is splitting hairs in Greenland. And what our recommendation is to create a maintenance situation with the Greenland fishery to make sure that we have strong relationships with them, that we incentivize good reporting. ASF works directly with the Greenlanders and the Greenland government on that, on incentivizing reporting and conducting science, and we're expanding that to hopefully some habitat protection in West Greenland. And so we think Greenland's done a good job, and we think that Canada should look internally in places like the Gulf region and reducing the striped bass population to achieve ecosystem balance, and that would generate far, far, far more returns of Canadian adult Atlantic salmon to Canadian rivers.
Good. Mr. Dalton, striped bass, your neck of the hood, Miramichi River. I think we've all seen around this table some video on this river of, big bunch of striped bass, spawning everywhere. In the last couple of years in this committee, we heard some DFO officials saying that, striped bass are not eating small salmon. It's not part of their diet. I think we all know that this is not accurate. We have evidence of that. But what do you think? Why do you think that DFO is so, and if it's the good word in English, like reluctant to decrease the number of striped bass population, to say, look, this is too much, the ecosystem is a little bit everywhere now. So why do you think that DFO officials do not want to reduce the amount of striped bass in the ecosystem?
I think it's a success story for DFO, one of few. And, so...
A success story in the sense that,
It's been a great recovery.
It's a recovery,
they were, 5,000 striped bass or even fewer, and they've managed to recover the population, and it's a population that's out of control at this point in time. So, and I know the study you're referencing is, a 2% survival rate, or 2% stomach contents of striped bass. But if you look at that and extrapolate that number, of 2% of striped bass have smolt in them, but there's 1 million striped bass, that's a lot of smolt. That's all the smolt. I mean, we're seeing, a 6-7% survival rate through the estuary.
So right now on the Miramichi River, if I'm not mistaken, there's a quota allocated to some First Nation.
Yep.
And they did not even fish all the quota, right?
That's correct.
So will you be what will be the best solution for you to decrease the population of striped bass on the Miramichi River? Will this be like the same that we're doing right now with First Nation, but they're not taking all the quota? If they're not taking all the quota, transfer to some other, and even a commercial fishery at some point. What is your view on that?
Yeah, my view is that, allowing the Gasbro fishermen to keep striped bass and as bycatch, maybe, there's all kinds of mechanisms you can use, liberalize the fishery, allow more retention, change the slot size.
So if I'm not mistaken, last year the Gasbro fisher were allowed to keep some of them, but it was at the last minute, right?
Yeah, it was a short window there.
Okay. So quick question before, you are all thinking that if we reduce the amount of striped bass that we have in your river in particular, that we'll see a huge increase, or at least an increase in the return in the next couple of years of salmon?
I think that if we don't have that as part of a management strategy, we're not going to see a change. You can't count out habitat restoration, climate change, other factors affecting Atlantic salmon, but it's of particular concern in the Miramichi. And without a reduction in striped bass, and I would argue even, a supplementation program, whether that's a smolt to adult supplementation or increasing the number of juvenile salmon we put out through conservation and hatcheries, that we're not going to see any difference. It has to be part of the equation.
Thank you. That went well over time. I'm sorry. I just wanted to let the members know before I go to Mr. Dishan that there is a vote being called, and we have 27 minutes left. And I wanted to know what the committee wanted to do. Did you want to give us a 15 minutes to vote, or you want to vote in here? Or do you want to go back to the House? What's the unanimous consent here on this? Say here, vote, so we can go up, we can take another 15 minutes, or do you want 10 minutes? Because if you're voting on the app, you don't need a full 15 minutes. What do you want to do?
The vote will be after 7 p.m.
It will be, so we can finish this? Yeah?
The vote's not until 7:09, so.
So that's good, okay. All right, so go ahead. Just wanted to flag it for you. Mr. Deschamps, for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Damu, thank you very much for your advocacy. You explained the importance of saving the Atlantic salmon and all that goes with it. You know the Costofuch, Masterpedia River very well. I think you fished your first salmon there when you were 6 years old, so you've been on the river for some years now. What have you observed? What is interesting about the Ristigouche River compared to the Miramichi River is that there was never any striped bar there. When you look at historic data, when you look at scientific studies carried out by DFO, we realize that there was never any striped bass in the west of the Baie de Chaleur. So the striped bass in the Ristigouche Bay is an invasive species. It was never there before. So to verify to what extent this is true, I am friendly. Many Mi'kmaqs are my friends, so I've talked with them. And the Mi'kmaq elders have told me the same thing. There was never any striped bass in the Ristigouche Bay. So it's not recovery of a species that existed there before. Depending on the ancestral knowledge of the people there, there was never any there. Now, to reassure myself that this was true, I talked with my fishing guide friends who have been on the river for a while. I know guides who were there at 10 with their fathers, and their fathers had been on the river with their own fathers for 60 years. So we have many years of history passed on from father to child, 130 years, and they never saw striped bass on the Ristigouche River. When we talk about the Ristigouche River, we are not talking about the same phenomenon we see at Miramichi. We are talking about an invasive species. There was never any striped bass in the Ristigouche and Amatepedia. Do you see a lot of them there now? Last year, in some areas, we could count up to 2,000 striped bass. Before I came here, I stopped at the Ristigouche Bridge, and already I could see some striped bass coming up on the Ristigouche side. You asked a question. You put it to the Quebec Federation of Atlantic Salmon. You talked about juvenile salmon being eaten in the river. And I can tell you that the juvenile salmon run into the striped bass coming up. And when the salmon doesn't come back, it's because a lot of the juvenile salmon that should go to Greenman are eaten up by striped bass. So this is something that you have observed. Yes, I would even say more. I think it is important. I saw the disappearance of another type of fish disappear. It's the same thing with the trout. So we should be careful with striped bass when we think everything is happening at sea. Trout doesn't go to the strait in Newfoundland. But why are you saying that that is the cause? Are there other causes? There may be other causes. At some point, as a guide, I did not have the right to capture when I capture the striped bass, I'm a guide and also a striped bass. So when you look into its stomach, you know what is happening. And I could see salmonella. So sometimes we could talk about temperature and this or that. But this is one of the problems I've seen in salmon. If you ask me the question, I would tell you this quickly because we need to hurry and go vote. The first thing I would do, I will kill 3 million seals. Because if we killed 3 million seals, and the cod population will increase, and the salmon population will also increase, and DFO would look bad. That's why they want to carry out studies, make us waste our time, let us talk. And let me remind you, we are losing our jobs, 500 jobs, 15 million. On the Ristigouche River and Lac Pétia, there were never any striped bass there. So what are you proposing when it comes to the striped bass? Increased recreational fishing, commercial fishing? Did you say commercial fishing? Don't forget that striped bass is invasive. It's not like what we see in Miramichi. But striped bass, for some people, some outfitters, could represent a business opportunity. Striped bass could be harvested everywhere at no cost, but people come from everywhere in the world to come and fish salmon in the Ristigouche River. So the real economic value is not on a fish that could be harvested everywhere. Real economic value lies with salmon. Imagine the dream of being able to go back to our rivers, and instead of giving a small fish, we can kill salmon and eat it. If we did that as a Canadian society, we will really succeed. But for as long as DFO is bearing decisions that are taken, all we'll be doing is organizing meetings forever and to keep talking. So you are saying that we should turn to commercial harvesting. Something else, science. With real science, robust science, we'll be able to take the right decisions we need. So if we take everyone of goodwill, and we stop using salmon as a political fish, I think we may succeed. So when you talk about science, real studies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damo.
We're now going to go to a second round, and this is a 5-minute round. And so we're going to go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you for the witnesses. I noticed you were sitting in the back of the room earlier for the testimony as well. Thank you for being here. I want to turn right away to, I guess, all of you. Recommendation number 13 in this committee's report from January 2017, recommendation 14 was that Fisheries and Oceans Canada allow a significant increase in the harvest of striped bass by the recreational fishery by lengthening the retention season and increasing catch limits where striped bass populations warrant it. Was that recommendation followed by the department? Mr. Wilbert?
There was a slight relaxation in recreational fishing harvest retention rule season length. So the department did take some action on that. The most significant action was the increase of the indigenous commercial striped bass quota from 50,000 to 175,000. And then last year, the short window of allowing bycatch in the Gaspereau fishery. So the indigenous commercial fishery has been the largest component, and it's a learning curve. Eelgram First Nation has done a great job growing that fishery. It's taken some time. It's a learning curve. They need help.
But was there a significant increase in the harvest of striped bass by the recreational fishery?
The department does not measure the harvest of striped bass in the recreational fishery. So it's a long-standing recommendation that we have.
We have no idea then whether there was they allowed a significant increase.
They allowed a significant increase in the opportunity, but have not measured the result of that.
Results. Thank you for that. Also, in that same report from 2017, recommendation 13 was that Fisheries and Oceans Canada support a gray seal harvest program that emphasizes full utilization of the seal to provide economic opportunities with an aim to significantly reduce the seal populations and enhance the recovery of wild Atlantic salmon populations. That was a recommendation out of this committee, a unanimous recommendation. This sounds uncannily familiar to me from the West Coast with our wild steelhead populations in the Fraser. Those steelhead populations now are basically down to zero. And Dr. Carl Walters completed a study and recommended management of predation in the estuaries. I believe his report said that we could see a 70 to 80% increase in steelhead returns if that predator management was done. Do you feel the predator management between striped bass and the gray seal populations would be a first good step in this? I see Mr. Demours nodding on that. Can you go ahead on that, Mr. Demore, and then I'll ask Mr. Wilbur.
I think we all agree. Je crois que personnellement,
Personally, if we want to talk about efficient direct action that will produce results in the short term, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to take care of the seal and take care of the striped bass. If that is done, it would help us attain our objectives. There's an urgent need for that. We no longer have time to lose organizing endless meetings year after year. We need to take action. If we're to find out what we need to do, the seal and striped bass, that is what we need to work on, and good science.
Okay. Mr. Wilbur, quickly.
Thank you. Striped bass is a localized, significant pressure on one of Canada's most important wild Atlantic salmon rivers, the Miramichi, and it will reducing that population will immediately result in significantly improved Atlantic salmon survival and adult returns to Canadian rivers.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to those two recommendations because those were recommendations to government. So basically what we're hearing, please tell me, did government respond appropriately and implement those two recommendations?
Maybe we could get Mark Hambrook to comment on that. If he's still on there.
He's there online. He needs to open his camera.
Can you please open your camera and...
Okay.
Good.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the question. I mean, I remember back when those recommendations were made, and efforts that were made to try to get a gray seal harvest, especially from the, private communities. But we always ran into roadblocks. One of the big one was the Marine Protection Act in the United States, that if we harvest seals, they could, if we use them for some purpose, they might ban our lobster imports. So trying to get a gray seal harvest has not been easy, even though there's people willing to do it. I think they have markets identified. It's been this political struggle. And certainly striped bass, we've increased the recreational fishing limits, more, and an indigenous commercial fishery, but all moving way too slow to make a difference. I mean, fundamentally is that this lower reference point of 330,000 is a real stumbling block for DFO. We need it down to 100,000, and we think that that was a flawed study. The 330,000, we've asked the government to reconvene, bring different scientists in, and get that lowered. If that was lowered to 100,000, we'd be able to do something more.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Mr. Cormier for the Liberals for 5 minutes, please, Serge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to Mr. Wilbur just for a second, the 80 million strategy that we just announced, plus your 20-something more million that you're going to put in, what are you going to do with that money?
Thank you very much for the question. And Atlantic salmon face such a range of issues because they have a complex life cycle all the way to Greenland and back. Low marine survival is widely recognized as the major bottleneck across the Canadian range. And so we need to look at, there are such a range of issues. Some we can control, some we can't. And low marine survival, we may not be able to do very much about. But what we can control is removing barriers in watersheds so that habitat isn't as fragmented. It's like death by 1,000 cuts in eastern Canada with dams and culverts. And there's climate resilient cold water habitat there. We need to remove those barriers. We'll be investing in that. We need landscape protections to buffer against the impacts of climate change, warming water, increased, rain intensity events. So protecting more land and contributing to the Canada 30 by 30 commitment, it's probably the biggest opportunity in our lifetimes to make progress on one of the root cause issues and give Atlantic salmon a gift of long-term sustainability, which is cold, clean water.
maybe I'll go to Mr. Dalton real quick and then Mr. Damo. You are all, if I can say, some conservation group for, let's say, Atlantic salmon, right? There's some other conservation group that does not agree with you regarding a striped bass. That it's, like you said, it's a success story. Wow, hey, it's growing. So how do you blend together and explaining to each other, yes, it's a success story, but there's no balance anymore here?
Well, just the way that you've said, there is no balance. I think that we're, from a management perspective, DFO is engaged in single species management in isolation. They're not looking at an ecosystem-based approach. Everybody likes to fish striped bass. Everybody likes to fish Atlantic salmon, but when you get 3 guys in a boat that can go out for 4 hours and catch 270 striped bass, there's a problem, That's catching, it's not fishing. So, I mean, I don't think anybody wants to see the demise of striped bass. They're a native species to the Miramichi. We're just looking for a balance here because it's an ecosystem out of control, and it's having an impact not only on Atlantic salmon, but, on trout, Gaspereau, and other species. So,
Monsieur Damour,
Mr. Damour, as I told you a while ago, I've been fishing salmon for 25 years, but I'm probably not an expert like yourself. I have my own equipment. I've been fishing. I have 2. The first time was the green machine that I used, and the second one was a blue trap. Do you have did you catch small salmon? I think the biggest was 27 pounds. So I'm happy I got close to that. Now, a while ago, you talked about jobs, guides, camps, cooks, even the small shops that are around the fishing areas. Do you sometimes think that recreational fishing is fishing by the rich? People think it's fishing by rich people. It's not serious. There's nothing wrong if there's no investment. Is this something you hear? Certainly is fishing by the rich. Even for the ordinary Canadian, it's expensive to go fish salmon. But when we don't want to act, we can always find good reasons. But let's not forget, we have many fishing camps. People often say that it's the Americans that own the rivers, but we need to make an effort to realize that behind every American, there are sometimes 3 or 4 people from the village who have a job. So we must consider the entire society in the north of New Brunswick and that area that live thanks to salmon fishing. So we need arts. The river and salmon feed many people. But have you noticed, like me, that over the past few years, there's been recreational fishing being practiced by all categories of people, young people. We see young people who are very interested in recreational fishing. They want to do more. Have you also seen that when you are working as a guide, it's not only the rich people? I'm very happy to see even women, because at the beginning, I only guided men. But now I've initiated many women. Many women received juvenile salmon that I gave them. People come to fish for salmon, as I explained before. They see the virtues of salmon fishing. They capture the salmon, they put it back in water. They see the virtues, the healing powers. So it's young people, older people, people who are not rich, who can touch salmon. So it's a precious good that we cannot lose. Let's not forget that striped bass is an invasive species.
Can we wrap up, please? Mr. Dishon, 2.5 minutes.
I have a question, maybe for Mr. Wilbur. I understand your point of view and the importance of taking action on striped bass. Now, concretely speaking, what are you proposing that we do to reduce the population of striped bass in the Miramichi River?
Great question, thank you. I'm proposing specifically that DFO support the Eel Ground First Nation and other First Nation communities throughout the Gulf region in the development of the fishery so that they can actually catch the 175,000 quota that DFO has set, and simultaneously allowing bycatch in the Gaspereau fishery throughout the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
Et quel genre d'appui vous proposez pour les Premières Nations? Qu'est-ce qui manque parce que le quota est accordé?
What kind of support are you proposing? What is missing? Do you have the right quota?
They currently are not allowed to use enough trap nets. They use live trap nets. And Eel Ground First Nation in particular, they would like to use more, and they would like to have a multi-year license. Right now it's year to year. They'd like to have a multi-year license so that they can plan and make investments in equipment and personnel. That's a significant bottleneck. And allow the communities to use enough nets to catch what the quota is. And last year, only about 60,000 of that 175,000 quota was handed out to the communities. And it is in DFO's defense, it's a learning curve. Last year was the first year of that larger quota. The minister has assured us that the full quota will be handed out this year, and we're appreciative of that, and we hope that the department is able to do that.
Merci. Monsieur Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Concretely speaking, what do you think should be done to create a balance and reduce the striped bass population on the Miramichi River?
Do you mind if I defer to Mark here for this question?
No. He's on mute. He's on mute.
You're on mute. Can you please unmute?
Yep.
Thank you.
I have. Thank you for the question. I think what Mr. Wilbur has suggested is the right approach. But I just like to add is that the population of salmon is so stressed now, we still have to make sure it's going to take time to get the ecosystem in balance. And so we have to do restoration efforts. We have to try to save every little salmon that we can until we can get the ecosystem balance. The ecosystem is out of balance in the Gulf of St. Lawrence with gray seal. The cod population is devastated there. Never recover as long as there's gray seals. And, so there are big issues in getting ecosystem balance. And so we have to save every fish we can until we get it balanced.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the witnesses for coming and for, again, I am learning about fish, things I didn't know. You have been very excellent in suggesting recommendations, which is good. You pinpointed the problems and you gave some good recommendations. So I want to thank you for coming. And now we have to, yes, sorry, Serge?
Of the vote, Madam Chair, I think I'm going to move to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, good, thank you. Meeting is adjourned.
Agreed.